right, if everyone who's interested in sticking around for this next great panel on fixing the housing crisis, mostly focused in the Bay Area, but we can, I'm sure, draw lessons that would apply elsewhere as well. All of the panelists here work for organizations that are doing something or pushing for some reform or action that in some way addresses the underlying causes of the housing crisis here. So please filter back into the pews and sit down. And as soon as this panel is done, we'll have Kim My Cutler close out the evening. And the same format is following, 10 minutes each. We'll have a timekeeper, short discussion to follow, and then some Q&A. So I appreciate everyone sticking around. Is this one ready to go? All right, so Zach, do you want to? Yeah, I'm trying. Can we get it full screen or no?
Hi, can everyone hear me okay? Check, check. My name's Zach Shore. I'm the Director of Development with Panoramic Interests. We are a private developer in San Francisco, and we focus on building infill housing in the downtown. I showed this presentation to someone last night, and they mentioned that they thought denser was not a word, but that freaked me out, so I since looked it up, and denser is actually a word, so just wanted to. Okay. So Panoramic Interest has been focusing on infill development for the past 25 years. We've traditionally built what we call de facto student housing in Berkeley, and we've since made an entrance into San Francisco. These are some of the projects we've built over the years around the campus of UC Berkeley. All of our projects in the past have been car-free by nature of their general location, and what we discovered was that we can build housing for a lot less when we do not incorporate parking into it in the urban core. These are some of the projects we're currently working on. About half of our developments are in San Francisco, and the other half are in Berkeley. For today's topic, I used the metaphor of an iceberg to represent the housing crisis. And we differentiate ourselves from other for-profit developers in the sense that we do not build luxury. Most Bay Area developers focus on building luxury housing, which we kind of view as the tip of the iceberg. On the right, this is a 400 square foot studio that rents for $3,500 in downtown San Francisco. It's across from our office, and it has a view basically of the building next door, and it's 400 square feet. We focus on the more what we deem the core issues of the affordability crisis. So we focus on student housing, workforce housing, and homeless housing. We focus on student housing because there are 80,000 students in San Francisco and 8,000 beds for them. That leaves 72,000 students competing with the open market of renters, typically funded by affluent parents. And we see that as kind of a low-hanging fruit of stock to build in the city. We focus on workforce housing, primarily because nobody's really focusing on that in the city. It's either luxury or affordable, which leaves this kind of middle gap that you read about. So we, not covered by inclusionary subsidized housing. So we try to build simple spaces for people so that they don't have to leave the urban core. And then most recently, given our expertise, we've started focusing on homeless housing because it's kind of something that just cannot be ignored anymore. So we focus on three components to build what we deem affordable by design housing. One is all of our projects are car-free. A underground parking spot to build in the city costs about $75,000 per space, and that cost needs to be directly correlated into the rents we charge to our tenants. So we always try to focus on infill sites in transit-oriented neighborhoods and try to build zero parking. Number two, we always build small, efficiently, what we call intelligent design units, what we call micro DNA. We don't like to waste 1 square foot of space, so we really think about our designs and try to fit the maximum amount of density into our projects as possible so that we can build more units and pass the costs that we save on to our tenants. And then number 3, what we've really started focusing on the last 5 years is modular construction. For obvious reasons, you can reduce the timeline of your project and save a lot of costs on the project with modular construction and pass it on to your tenants. So with those 3 components, car-free, micro DNA in our projects, and modular construction, we're able to build for what we see as a lot less than other developers and pass those costs through to our tenants. We combine those 3 components in this project in the city recently that we finished in 2013. This was a car-free wood modular project of micro apartment studios. We stacked this project in 4 days with modular construction. So on August 18th, it was a parking lot, and then on August 22nd, it was a 4-story completed building that we wrapped up the skin within 4 months, and we thought that was a success. What we concluded on that project was that wood modular construction was largely inefficient, and we could not really scale it for our upcoming projects. And since then, the primary wood manufacturer in the city has gone out of business. So we've started focusing on steel modular construction, all based on ISO shipping container dimensions. So we're essentially using shipping container building components to produce housing. And what we've found out is piggybacking on the logistical components of shipping containers, we can build for about 40% less than other developers and really focus on our core focus, which is student housing, workforce housing, and homeless housing. So that's really emphasized our goals there. So a little bit of the technology. While we're pouring our foundations, we're fabricating the units off-site and then transporting them to the site on any truck, train, boat, trailer, and we're able to stack 1 floor per day with the technology. This is a project. We went to Europe and explored. This is a technology that's used in many countries except for the US at the moment. This is a project that we watched stacked in 8 days in the UK. This is 190 apartments, 380 modules that was stacked in 8 days. And so when we saw that, we were convinced, and now we're starting to build with it on a large scale in San Francisco. We're able to build in about half the time as anyone else, which really brings down project costs. So the technology and the logistical component really enable us to focus on our core issues and essentially build what we call affordable by design housing, and we can charge pretty much affordable rents with no gap financing. So we can privately finance all of it by just passing the savings on to our tenants. This is another exterior of one of the container projects in Amsterdam that we visited. This is a Citizen M hotel, which is a popular model, all built with modular construction over there. And this is the summary of our most recent business plan. We modeled it on the in and out model of simplicity, where we just want to build 3 housing units moving forward. We want to build a studio, a 2-bedroom, and a 4-bedroom out of ISO shipping container steel modules. And we see that as a way to really bring down costs, because it's just the idea of mass manufacturing housing has been around in the auto industry and pretty much every other industry up to date, except for construction. We still build with stick-framed wood on site, and it's largely inefficient. And we can use this technology and really change that. So this is what we call the Hamburger, which is our homeless housing unit. We call it the micro pad. PAD stands for prefab affordable dwelling. And we plan on building these on a large scale in San Francisco to house formerly homeless individuals. As everyone's aware, the homeless epidemic in California has gone on way too long, and it's now really the elephant in the room scenario. the number one challenge associated with homeless housing in the city is just getting the supportive housing units to locate the homeless to after they leave navigation centers, et cetera. So we based the micropad on the concept of housing first, which for those who don't know, it's essentially most cities have a model where they say you have to get clean and get a job and we'll give you a place to live. What this guy Sam Sembrus did with Housing First is the inverse of that, said we'll give you a place to live and you'll get clean and get a job, where the former approach has about a 25% retention rate, and his model has about a 90% retention rate with Housing First, which seems pretty intuitive. Not only that, but cities end up saving a lot of money just housing these individuals because they take the explicit and implicit costs associated with dealing with homeless on the streets by just simply putting them in homes. Many cities have implemented this, including San Francisco and New York. Utah essentially ended their homeless problem in about 10 years. So this is the studio unit that we're building, which we call the micropad. It's 160 square feet and is comprised about 1/2 of an ISO shipping container. And we plan on deploying these on a large scale in the city. This is the entire module. And that's an ISO picture of one of the modules with 2 units inside. Another shot there. We based the design on Citizen M Hotels, which is a popular pop-up hotel model in New York, Glasgow, and throughout Europe, where they're charging about $160 to $400 per night for these rooms. And we basically built on the same model. So we figure if it's okay for these high-end business hotels, that it'll be a perfect solution for homeless housing. It comes with all these features: full kitchen, bath, nice finishes throughout, fully furnished. We stack them in a matter of days on site, like I said. And this is just representative of the scale that you can apply this solution to. There are currently 4,400 unhoused homeless in San Francisco, and this ship can carry 18,000 shipping containers. So utilizing 24% of its capacity, we could provide housing for all of them in one fell swoop. Similar image in LA. This is a project that we're currently building in the Tenderloin, utilizing this technology for homeless individuals. It'll be 168 micropad apartments for formerly homeless, with supportive services on the ground floor and all the modules stacked above. So that's the model. I think I'm kind of running out of time and we're trying to expedite, so I'll just cruise through. Essentially, we're also doing this with a 2-bedroom apartment that we envision renting to market rate and low-income individuals. And we're also utilizing it for a 4-bedroom apartment built out of 3 shipping containers. Same model, small spaces, affordable by design. This is about equal to a 1-bedroom luxury apartment, and we can fit 4 people in it. And so that's it. Thanks.
So I'm going to step back and talk about the underlying theory for a bit, because I'm on the board of a group called the Bay Area Community Land Trust, and I'm also the co-chair of a campaign in Berkeley, California, to pass a tax on existing rental housing to recapture some of the windfall profits from rapidly rising rents in the area. But we need to step back and talk about, what kind of thinking underlies this. And Henry George was really the first great American reformer who actually liked cities. At the time that he was active, and really up to today, the usual picture of cities was that they were cesspools of immorality, and that what held the American Republic together were the rural and small town virtues. You hear that with Sarah Palin, for example, talking at the last election about, or whenever it was, about small town America as the real America. And you see that every time a group of people show up at a zoning board or a planning commission denouncing the idea of building an apartment building because they want to preserve the small town atmosphere of their suburb. So, in contrast, Henry George saw cities as engines of progress. He believed that, and it's been verified by a great deal of economic analysis, that the intense human interaction that you get in cities resulted in businesses being more productive and in people becoming more innovative and creative. And then George asked, okay, but if cities are engines of progress, why is there so much poverty? And the answer that he came up with is that the landowners vacuum up all that increased production in the form of higher land rents and land prices. And we see that going on in the Bay Area, which is, of course, one of America's centers of innovation right now. And about half the rent that tenants pay in the Bay Area is not, in fact, necessary to profitably operate and maintain the housing once it's been built and the construction costs are amortized. Instead, it's basically an admission charge. Welcome to the Magic Kingdom. Here's how much you have to pay to be here in the Bay Area. It's a massive transfer of income from tenants to real estate investors. Tenants in the Bay Area pay about $25 billion a year in rent for those million rental units. And I would say that about half of that is not actually necessary. But as I'm sure you realize, it's not the landowner who makes the location valuable. It's we, the people. And I regard it as a fundamental principle that in a democratic society, we, the people, have the right to either regulate, for example, through rent control, or to recapture through taxation the value that we and those who came before us have created. So this revenue can then be used for social benefit, including to help with our housing affordability problems. Now, I don't want to say that sort of freeing up the market through getting rid of unnecessary land use regulations isn't an important thing. It's not to say that increasing the housing supply isn't important, because it's desperately important. Nonetheless, new construction does not have the ability to solve the Bay Area's housing crisis. There will always be that additional amount of rent being charged for access to highly desirable, highly productive locations like the center of the San Francisco Bay Area. Another part of the solution that I think is extremely important is to take substantial amounts of land and the housing built on it out of the market, so that residents don't have to pay that extra admission charge and can live here for the necessary cost of operating and maintaining the building. This requires ownership by nonprofit organizations, limited equity cooperatives, community land trusts, and so on. It also requires a lot of money, because to buy the land and develop it, or to buy an existing building at their current inflated values means you've got to pay for the income that somebody otherwise could extract from their future tenants. In my opinion, the best and fairest way to get that money is to tap into the unearned increment in land values, but of course we have Prop 13 here in California and its progeny, designed to protect real estate investors' windfall profits. And of course, encouraging land speculation, because people who own vacant and underutilized land hardly pay anything in taxes. One of the things that many cities do to try and recapture some of the increasing land value and get around Prop 13 is, of course, requiring developers of new higher density buildings to provide community benefits, such as inclusionary housing, inclusion of below market rate housing in the buildings that they built. This small gap in Prop 13 is useful as long as developers can negotiate lower land prices so that the exactions are largely paid for out of the landowner's windfall profits and don't reduce housing production. But meanwhile, the owners of existing rental housing are just walking away with higher profits and don't even add to the housing supply. So how can we tap into those windfalls? Well, there's another small loophole in Prop 13. Most cities in the Bay Area have what's called a business license tax, often based on gross receipts. Applied to rental housing, this is considered a tax on rental housing as a business rather than as a tax on real estate. And so, by a majority vote of the people, you can pass an increase in the business license tax on residential rental units. In other words, you can increase taxes on landlords by a vote of the people. In Berkeley, California today, the rents in the older housing stock are now about $120 million a year, higher than they would have been if rents had simply increased with inflation. Our group is proposing to raise the gross receipts tax on owners of 5 units or more by 1.8%, which is only average $30 per unit per year, more, of course, for higher rent properties. And that would recapture about $5 million a year out of that $120 million a year in excess revenue. So that increase would come out of the windfall profits of Berkeley's landlords. It couldn't be passed on to tenants, partly because we have rent control, and also partly because really the landlords are raising the rents to the maximum the market will bear anyway. They might say, oh, if you raise our taxes, we'll increase the rent, but you know, they're going to raise the rent anyway. So here we have this proposed modest increase, and it will at least help with production of affordable housing, combined with other sources of subsidy that we're looking at, such as applying the local hotel tax to Airbnb rentals, a local density bonus program in addition to the state density bonus program, federal low-income housing tax credits. We should be able to add about 1,000 permanently affordable, nonprofit-owned housing units to the city of Berkeley over the next 10 years. And to put this in perspective, if you applied a 2% tax to rental property in the whole Bay Area, you would raise $500 million a year, and it would lead to construction of as many as 50,000 additional affordable apartments. Equally important, this approach strengthens nonprofit housing organizations that work for a more just and equitable society over the long term. Henry George's strategy of land value taxation did not develop long-lasting organizations. He got beaten out by the socialist movement, whose support for industrial unionism ultimately created very long-lasting social justice-oriented organizations for all the problems unions sometimes have. So as we build more affordable housing in the Bay Area through land trusts and nonprofit organizations, we can know that that housing will remain, the organizations will endure, and they will continue to embody and work for the ideal of a more just and equitable society.
All right, everybody. How are we doing? Great? Energy? Sit up, sit up. Almost there. I'll try to be quick so we can get to your questions. Those are the most interesting. My name is Alex Lofton. I'm a co-founder of a company called Landed in San Francisco. Before I explain a little bit more about what we do, how the heck did I get to be on the stage in my life? I'm a son of a couple union organizers, both a teacher and a social worker, but really involved in a lot of organizing work that drove me to work in politics early on in my young career. And I fell in love with organizing. I fell in love with bringing people with different interests to the table together. That work also took me across the country to see a lot of different cities in the US, and I fell in love with cities. And I fell in love with, for a lot of the reasons that were described in this panel and others, there's a lot of innovation that happens, there's a lot of exciting things that happen out of cities. It's a sustainable way for humanity to go forward, but there's also a crap ton of problems. And one of those problems became very acute for me, being a young person moving to San Francisco 6 years ago and watching the whole region change. And going from my 20s to my 30s, I agree, being 30 is awesome. that there is a desire at some point, at least that's ingrained in me, to think about settling down somewhere and having roots and moving from a renter to an owner of some sort at some point. And you live in a place like this, and you just question, how the heck do you ever become an owner? Like, ownership, it seems so far out of reach, and the leap from being a renter to an owner is just impossible. Just, a lot of people around, like me, just end up giving up the idea. So, but there's a lot of work that's been done by community land trusts, by a lot of people in this room before me that has thought very creatively about how to help people into home ownership, how to help people go from having no land to some land and stair-stepping into ownership. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do with our company, is help people stair-step into ownership by helping be a partner in buying a home rather than loading up people with more debt to do so. So let me explain how that works. We ultimately try to connect people who are wanting to be home buyers with people in their community or network that they're a part of who have money to invest in real estate, so that you can have a partner early on to get you started, and then when you have the means, the ability to buy your partner out, you can do so. I have a small team, both of folks who are really interested in real estate, but also a lot of people who are have made a lot of money and a lot of success in finance, who recognize a lot of problems that our society has that can only be solved by changing and new ideas within the world of finance and the world of real estate. So think about what it takes to buy a home today. Seems really impossible. I'll give you a quick example to kind of illustrate how we work currently. Take Jen, she's a teacher down in the South Bay for a school district there, and her partner together make over $100,000. So we're talking about people who are doing just fine in the grand scheme of things, but in the scheme of living in the Bay Area, still very much the dream of home ownership is out of the question. So she wants to commit to working in that school district for a long time, but is being tempted to move because settling seems really difficult. She's just one of many teachers that have this same sort of issue. The problem isn't for her paying her monthly rent. She can do it. It's a lot, but she can do it. In fact, if she had a mortgage, it would be about the same or even less, potentially. The problem is the gate to get in. The bar to enter homeownership is extremely high. Being able to have the down payment is a lot, and she can't save fast enough to have that down payment. So what we're trying to do is just recognize that by lowering that barrier of entry to start your homeownership, on your path to homeownership, by lowering the barrier of how much it costs to get your foot in the door, you could be on your way. So the thing to remember is that our whole system is set up on the intergenerational transfer of wealth. You got to ask your mom or your dad or brother or sister or grandparents to kind of help you buy your first house, especially in expensive places. So we basically just say, why can't there just be other options than mom and dad for people who don't have mom and dad to borrow that money? We basically find Jen an investment partner to make that happen. So what that means right now is that we partner with school districts, schools, charter networks to set up a branded fund for their community. Then we can turn to people who care about that school, that community, and say, hey, if you have money to invest in real estate, why don't you target it to the people who are your next door neighbor, rather than sending it across the entire country or investing in some portfolio product that's based in New York. And so we partner with this school. We find investors who care about that organization to invest in a fund, but then that fund has money that a teacher can use for part of their down payment. As a company, we take care of all the back-end infrastructure to make that work. It's really hard for a single organization to do this. It's really expensive to do that, so we do all that work and cover all that cost. As a company, we are interested in becoming profitable and growing by helping that person to the house as a broker. We don't worry about trying to be a part of the investment. And then we're able to pass that investment opportunity on to people who care about making money off of real estate. This is just an illustrative example of how it actually works. So let's say, just for simple math, but also the average home in San Francisco, of $1 million. To access a $800,000 mortgage, which is what you want to do if you want to get a good rate, and it's really what you have to do because there's not a whole lot of programs that let you do much more than that. You need to have $200,000 for a down payment, which is a lot of money. Let's say you scrimp and save, and you've gotten a little bit of, you have a little bit of a pad of money to invest in a home. A little bit, let me say a lot, of $100,000. That's only halfway there. There's still no way for you to buy that house in the future. 75% of folks in places like the Bay Area get help from their family to get to this 20% down payment. Most don't have rich parents, as I mentioned before, to help them. We basically come in and act as that rich parent, as the community investor on the bottom. We take that money from a fund, help buy your house at the beginning, you take out that mortgage, and then in the future, when the house grows in value, for every dollar the house grows in value, you give 25 cents to the investor, and then you keep 75 cents. But let's say that everything goes poorly and there's a loss in the market. You also you share in the loss with that investor. So for every dollar that's lost, 25 cents the investor loses. Which for those who don't, if this is kind of feeling like it's starting to go over your head, just remember that in debt, that's not how it works. The bank always gets paid. As an investor and a partner, it's a little bit more of a fair transaction. Our whole goal and the math behind all of this, which if you ever want to know, I have plenty of spreadsheets to share with you, tries to make this feel like as much like ownership for the home buyer as possible, so they're taking on the responsibility of ownership and get some of the benefit of that. And for the investor, the return should feel just like if they bought a property and rented it out to people. That should be about the same percentage they receive at the end of the day. The difference here is they don't have to deal with renting it out. They don't have to pay for it. So we make some adjustments for that. So that's the basic of the model. I'm not going to, if you're at all more curious, landed.com is where we are. Pretty simple, and I'm always happy to answer questions. The one thing I will say, just to kind of give a little bit more framing, is just that when my partner and I got thinking about the housing problem, being really curious about how to do something, one point is there isn't a silver bullet, that it does take a lot of solutions, and we clearly help a certain demographic of people, again, who can afford to live here, but can't get a foothold into ownership. There's a lot of other good work that happens for the other side of the spectrum, which leads me to say there's two different types of problems. There's an affordability problem and there's an accessibility problem. The affordability problem, my personal opinion, is you need to build more and you need to pay people more. Those are the two options you have to figure that out. There's others that there are other interesting solutions that are working on that, but those are, to me, are the biggest things that can move the needle there. On the accessibility question, it's about thinking a little bit differently about what it might mean to be a homeowner at the beginning. Rather than having to be the one, take out a mortgage on your own, and that means to be a homeowner, maybe it means having a partner. Maybe it means sharing that equity over time. Maybe it means being able to buy part of your neighborhood, helping your neighbors buy into a house over time. So there's a lot of interesting things that we can do on accessibility when we also are trying to think about the problem of affordability. So I'll stop there.
There we go. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Tim Colin, and I run the San Francisco Housing Action Coalition. It's a 17-year-old membership-based nonprofit that is dedicated to, the creation of well-designed, well-located housing at all levels of affordability. Our sandbox is San Francisco. And I find myself in agreement with a lot that's being said today, and our work really is trying to grapple with the city's unprecedented housing affordability and displacement crises. Quick show of hands, how many housing refugees from San Francisco in the room? Show of hands. Anybody here because they couldn't take San Francisco? Okay, good to know, yeah. So as I said, our little sandbox is San Francisco, but really this is a regional issue. And we are cursed in San Francisco by having a red-hot economy that's attracting people from around the country and certainly around the world, high-skilled workers, high-compensated, coming to a city that has chronically and for decades underproduced the amount of housing that it needs. And I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Our housing crisis wasn't caused by Twitter, Google, or Facebook. we've done this to ourselves. We have chosen policies for the last 2 or 3 decades that have led us to this position where our population is growing by about 10,000 residents per year, and that includes, in the depths of the recession, there was a vibrant startup scene in San Francisco. So even while the economy was flat on its back, tech workers were moving to the city. And this is to a city that has a historic production rate somewhere around 1,700, 1,800 units a year. As I say often at these gatherings, what we're arguing about isn't about values, it's about math. The displacement crisis is brutal and it's ugly. It forces people out that can't compete in a red-hot real estate market, and it's troubling. Our city has no sustainability, no future if housing prices continue to escalate at 10 to 15% a year. That's a sucker's game, and the city will become less diverse, less inclusive, more homogeneous if that happens. It's already a city that's become hostile to the young families, seniors, immigrants, the artists, the weirdos, the hippies, everybody. It's going in a direction of becoming a luxury resort with a certain amount of housing that we can afford to subsidize. Not a good outcome. There's something else I'd like to bring to your attention, and we sort of are the wonks that deal with housing policy, both in San Francisco, but there's something truly remarkable going on now in Sacramento, and it's not getting any attention. It's very opaque. It's not in the news. But Governor Brown, a liberal Democrat with 60% approval ratings, has done something that's unprecedented to me. I've been doing this almost 12 years, and what he proposed about a month ago is the first thing I've seen that could possibly move the needle. And what he said is 2 things that are really, really fundamental to real estate and housing in California. And it's not just San Francisco, it's the entire state. The first thing he said is, cities and local jurisdictions, you're not doing it. You're not cutting it. You don't get it. You're not producing housing. Why? Because the conversation is largely dominated. I'd say it's a generational fight. It's older people who have lived there a long time, like it. And in San Francisco, I say it's a class of people, it's a strong cultural trait in San Francisco, of people who say, the city was perfect on the day I moved there. And if you build that project, you're hurting my city. That hurts me. What's wrong with it the way it is? Why would you build that? And we're strangling ourselves. So Governor Brown has said, you're not doing it. The rules that are in play in California skew greatly to give people who are opposed to physical change, it gives them power to stop or even more perniciously delay projects that makes the cost go up. There is a real cost to delay. The second thing he said was, and this is a liberal Democrat, he says, in our economic system in the United States, there is not enough money in the world for us to subsidize our way out of this problem. Another way of saying that is, we need affordable housing, but it has to be paid for with subsidies or somehow incentives. And in San Francisco, last year we passed a $300 million bond to build affordable housing, split out among a few programs. In San Francisco, it costs as much to build an affordable home, a subsidized home, as it does a market rate home. That number is now around $700,000 to $800,000 to build and deliver it. So you can start to see that's close to $1 million. A $300 million bond ain't going to do it. And Jerry Brown recognized this. He said, you keep coming to me, meaning the state legislators, for lots and lots of general fund money, and you deliver so little housing with it. And he says, and he staked a lot of political capital on this, saying, I want by-right housing. Now that's a very radical term. By-right housing is a term that describes housing that if it meets the city's general plan and its zoning rules, and If it's close to transit, it has a certain amount of subsidized housing that it provides. If it does those things and complies with the rules that we've set for it, cities all over the state have set for housing there, you can't appeal it, you can't obstruct it, it goes in. That's pretty radical. And there's a very, very powerful organization called the League of California Cities, which is just what it implies. It's all the cities banding together and they have lobbyists. They are freaking out because what Governor Brown is doing is taking power away from local jurisdictions and giving it to the state. Our organization, the Housing Action Coalition, absolutely supports this because it's the first tool we've seen in ages that could say, you can't appeal projects to death anymore. You can't, this is a, you hear the term NIMBY bandied around a lot, but it really is, I go to dozens and dozens and dozens of hearings as part of my job, and there's not a single housing project ever that gets proposed that doesn't get someone, at least one person, but maybe dozens and maybe many organizations getting up and saying, no, 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 do not approve this. And we've sort of boxed ourselves into a corner. So I'll just stop there and say that I agree with Stephen here. This housing affordability crisis represents an enormous economic transfer of wealth from renters, relatively less wealthy, to homeowners, relatively more wealthy. It's not pretty to watch, but we can look at ways to say, well, if only we regulated this and we put more taxes here and we stopped this and promoted that. We've regulated ourselves into this tight little box that we're in now. There is no solution to urban economists and urban planners and the members of our community that we see unless the state starts seriously increasing the housing production rate, sustains it, and keeps it there for a long time. Thank you.
So I want to open it up to a very quick Q&A. We've got Kim Mai up next, Kim Mai Cutler from TechCrunch. So very quickly, let's take like 3 questions all at once and then open it up to the panel for 5 minutes. I saw Nate's hand go up first, then Sonia, and then you, good sir.
Please. I heard you mention the gross receipts tax, and I'm not very thrilled about that because I think that a lot of that rental housing will get converted into condos, and the landlords will stop putting in the amount of money it takes to make good repairs, and eventually they might just cave in the ceilings and say, it's not rental property anymore. It's just a vacant. It's just a derelict building. So I'm not a big fan of that, but you did mention that there were business taxes that you could apply, and I know that in the past when that's been done, it's been based on square footage of real estate, and I'm wondering if it's possible, to modify that and say we're going to have a business license fee, but we're going to do it by land area on that location as opposed to a business license.
Okay, let's try to keep these in the form of questions. Okay, and short, concise ones. So, Sonia, are you ready? No, we're going to take 3, and then we're just going to let them answer in 5 minutes.
Okay, my question is for Mr. Panoramic. This is a great panel. You're super interesting. So, if the ballot measure that would open up competitive bidding for affordable housing in San Francisco passed, would Panoramic be able to bid and build these things? Like, would that ballot measure affect your ability to build the big strategy?
Okay.
An additional question for the representative of Panorama. How has the reception been in conversations with single residency occupancy owners in providing them a business plan with increasing their density but handling their population through the BIL period? Has that been an avenue that's explored, and how's it going?
Okay, panelists, answer those 3 questions, and then we will change sessions.
Okay, so just quickly, I think it's completely ludicrous to think that a modest increase in the costs that landlords deal with would result in them deteriorating their buildings or converting them to condominiums. Condominium conversion, at least in Berkeley, largely stopped once with vacancy decontrol. Rents, as units became vacant, could go to market, and market rents had soared. So we're not in a market that actually calls for condominium conversion. We're in a market where the rental housing itself is more valuable to the owners than selling them off as condominiums. The rents in the Bay Area are largely, at this point, are largely determined by tenants' ability to pay. They are not based on the cost to the owner. So when some government tax increases taxes, just as if the cost of insurance goes up, the fact is it's just going to slightly reduce what are already an excessive level of profits. I don't see that shifting from a percentage of gross receipts to square footage would really do very much, but a square footage tax would be a parcel tax, and it would require a 2/3 vote under the California Constitution, whereas a business license tax that's based on gross receipts, the alternative, by the way, is fixed amounts or by employees, and we don't want to discourage employment. So basically, the percentage of gross receipts is our best bet in terms of being able to do this with a majority vote. And you've got 2 questions, so.
This doesn't work.
Can we get his microphone on, please?
Yeah, answering Sonia's question, as far as bidding. Bring it down. Okay. As far as bidding on and utilizing that funding, we've kind of gone down that road, and we have strong relationships with a lot of the nonprofits in town, and we've concluded that we don't want to do that. We're a private developer, and basically the way we look at one of these projects is if it's a $10 million project, being a private developer building it, we can eliminate about 15 to 20% of the costs of what a nonprofit has to go through with all the bureaucratic red tape, peer reviews, et cetera, just by building these things private. And then piggybacking on lowering the construction costs and time of the project, we can reduce it even more. So essentially what we're trying to do, or are doing, is build this needed housing for the city without the gap financing that a nonprofit needs to go out and get. So no, we won't be bidding on those projects. And your question, I think I was a little confused by it, but I essentially we kind of came up with this idea, having built a lot of modular stuff, and then we kind of saw that the homeless housing crisis as an opportunity to chip in and help out. We saw that, the mayor's office of housing was going out renting dilapidated SRO units for huge rents to these private owners, and these are, units that need capital improvements. They have bathrooms down the hall. They're 70 square foot units. What we're offering is a 160 square foot unit with a kitchen and bath inside it for less money than what they're renting those for. So, was your question that? Are we considering taking on the people that are living in them, or?
Approaching SRO owners and saying, hey, you can increase your density. Now we'll give you a temporary location for your current tenants, because that's their main problem.
Mm-hmm. Oh, right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have not really explored that. We've mostly been focusing on chronic homeless, but that is a good idea.
Okay, I want to conclude this panel. I want to thank you all for coming and joining. We're going to give Kim Mike Cutler a chance to set up. And so why don't we take just a few minutes break and let her set up.